I mean, wherever we went. And one day I told you the story, and Dick said, "We're stars." And I said, "There's only one station. They have to watch us." That was my song.
This business eats money and picks its teeth with $1,000 bills.
It was the first station in the country built for color from the ground up.
The Big Ape was not organized like any station I have ever worked in before.
And I wound it up and I thought, well, I wonder how I did.
Butch, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first at the top?
I was born in a small little town up in Chicago. Moved to Jacksonville and decided I wanted to be a radio announcer. Don't know why. No motivation other than it just seems like something really cool. And got a job at a little station out of Jacksonville Beach. I sent a letter to the owner of the station. In 1961, I was going into the 10th grade. And like I said, he actually called back and talked to my mom first because I was 15. So he wanted, was this for real? Yeah, it was real. And put me on the air. I signed the station on. And of course, at 15 years old, I couldn't drive. So they traded out with the yellow cab company at the beach. They picked me up every morning and took me to the station about 5:30. I turned the transmitters on, 15 years old. Nobody was there with me. You know, I don't know. Well, if you push both of these buttons, you'll burn the whole place up. You know, but you just did it.
Which radio station was this?
That was WZRO 1010,
Wow.
which is the XL whatever now.
As far as you know, you may have been the youngest person on
Actually, at the time I probably was, but Bill Greenwood preceded me at WZRO. He was about 4 years older than me. And he had been on WZRO when they were actually top 40, and a lot of kids listened to the local beach station at the time.
So what year was this, roughly?
1961.
First time you get into a studio, first time you hit the microphone, were you nervous at all?
Probably not. I had built my own little radio station in my house. Had 2 turntables, and I didn't know what it was doing. I didn't know how to cue records or any of that stuff. But I had been playing. It used to drive my mother crazy because I'd turn the speakers off, put my headphones on, and I'd play. And that's what my parents called it, playing radio. Until I got my first real job, and then it was, what are you going to do today? I said, I'm going to work. No, you're not. You're going to play radio. It's inside and air conditioned, you know, so it fit perfect. It was great.
Growing up, you must have listened to different radio people, radio stations. Were there any key inspirations back then before you got into the studio for the first time?
Yeah, I mean, being in Jacksonville, you know, we could pick up WABC, and so going into the 60s, about the time I got into it, listening to some of the guys on 77 was what we did, and I listened to WLS a lot. Clear channel stations came in, and they were the big rockers. They were what everybody remembers.
Were there a couple of personalities that, you know, stick in your head as far as
Dick
people who might
Biondi, Cousin Brucey, who's still on Sirius XM now. So yeah, those are the guys. Herb Oscar Anderson, some of the ones from WABC especially.
When you were getting into this, was your goal, you know, hey, I'm going to go ahead and be on the air in my hometown, or did you feel like, hey, I'll do this for a little while and then maybe, you know, try to go on to New York or Chicago?
I never had that desire. A lot of my friends and peers, that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to go to big stations, and you know, I always felt like, and it was all the same. When you're sitting in the studio, it doesn't matter whether you're in Chicago or whether you're in Paducah, Kentucky. I mean, it just doesn't make any difference. You're still doing the same entertaining. Do you have more people listening? Yeah, you hope so. But I would have done my first job in radio for free. I mean, they did pay me, but I would have done it for free just because it was fun. I mean, it was fun, and it was fun the whole time I was in it. Never didn't want to get up and go to work while I was in radio.
That had to be a thrill to be broadcasting your hometown.
Well, you know, at first it is, and then it's like everything else. It's a job. You know, I'm going in, and you meet some really interesting people. That's for sure, both in and outside of radio.
Such as who?
Jerry Goodwin, Mike Ranieri, Chuck Dent, Sal Mann. You know, some of the people that maybe didn't really inspire me, but they were the peers and the contemporaries who were well thought of in the industry, and even here in Jacksonville.
Ranieri and Dent were a couple of co-workers of yours.
Mike was the morning man, and Chuck Dent was the newsman, and they had their little banter between the two of them, and just the chemistry was right, and the chemistry was right for WPDQ at that time. Everything just fit together perfectly. Henderson and Belk owned the station in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I was, while I was going to school up there. And when I flunked out of school, NC State, I said, you know, I'm going back to Jacksonville, and they said, well, go take tape into Mike, and he'll see if he's got anything available. And he did, and Bruce Kramer was on. Bruce and I wound up being good friends, but I kind of took away a few of his hours. He and Mike didn't get along very well. But yeah, it was the chemistry was right. Hurricane Dora had just come through in 1964. All the stations were off the air. PDQ's engineer Ernie Harrelson kept them on the air, and they kicked off the new format with the new lineup. Mike Ranieri came down from Raleigh, and they had George Mash, Bill Weaver, Tom Kennington, and Ron Wayne, and Bill Mervyn, Midnight to 6. And they literally took the town by storm.
Moving and grooving together on a fantastic day. I'm your DJ. We got music by the lot. Games, you can be a winner.
WPDQ-FM declares war on Bubblegum Radio. Stereo Rock 97. We won't insult you with contests, games, and noisy announcers. Finally, there's a musical alternative for Jacksonville. The new rock. WPDQ-FM.
Pam's jingles and the whole routine that nobody had heard much of. MBR had them for a while.
It almost seems like after Hurricane Dora that they were rebooting WPDQ, but wasn't it already a fairly successful station before then?
It was called Sunny 60 at the time, and they never quite got over the hump. And back then, you basically had Hooper and Pulse ratings, so and they are, the reason they're not around is because they weren't that accurate to begin with. But after they kicked off the station 60, basically, I mean, the joke was everybody else could turn their transmitters off because we were so far ahead of everybody. Even the 8. I mean, the 8 just wasn't a factor at that particular time. The morning show with Mike and Chuck probably was the only one that was susceptible to any other radio station. That was WJAX, believe it or not. So, and remember, this is all AM radio, no FM. So they pretty much did that until Ranieri left. Ranieri left, I think, in '66, something like that. And then the station kind of leveled out, and the 8 picked up, and there was more competition then. And then when Jack Gale came and the Kaplans took the thing over later than that, it did very well.
You know, it almost seems that when WPDQ relaunched after Hurricane Dora, that the success was immediate. So was it actually even quicker than a lot of people suspected?
I don't think anybody even could imagine how quickly it took off and how quickly it was accepted. I think there was that void. The Ape was there; they were playing rock and roll and all of that, but it didn't have that spark. It didn't have that big radio feel to it, and I don't know how to explain it other than that. I didn't listen personally. I didn't listen to the Ape. Not hardly any of my friends when I was growing up listened to the Ape. I remember when the Ape came on as a daytimer, 25,000 watts, and then I remember when they finally got full 50,000 watts and were on 24 hours. But see, I lived at the beach, and the signal was okay, but it basically went up and down, east and west down Beach Boulevard, and so you could pick it up farther north, but at the beach it wasn't a factor. And we listened to WMBR.
Is it fair to say that what you do, your team at WPDQ were doing, with this relaunch, this reboot post-hurricane, was kind of taking some things that had worked in the big cities and applying it to Jacksonville radio and maybe bringing in, some fresh new ideas, some concepts and things that really hadn't been heard before in this market?
I think that's a fair statement. I think that's what Ranieri in the morning show was, something completely different, very sarcastic, and people liked to listen to him because they didn't know what he was going to say next. And that's kind of a thing that's happened in radio with Howard Stern and those kind of guys. Not that Ranieri was like Stern, but I think that's what did it. And you had good, solid rock and roll disc jockeys. And I don't know they weren't time and temperature guys. Like I said, the Pam's Jingles sure made a big difference. And Station 60, as your moniker, was totally different. And I mean, you had people going around singing the jingles, so that was cool too. And everybody knew you. I mean, I was a part-time guy, just working on the weekends, but everybody knew who I was. And later on, we wound up doing the Car 60 thing again, and they gave me the car. It was a 1966 Impala Super Sport with a vinyl top and painted up with Station 60 all over it, and I got to take it home. I mean, they let me take the car home and drive it. They wanted it out on the street, and I drove around Jacksonville and stopped cars and gave them prizes. And everybody knew the station. Everybody knew us, and how lucky can you be? I remember my friends were all lifeguards out at the beach, and I pulled up with the Car 60 once. I'm in an air-conditioned car. They're sweating to death. And I said, how did you get a job like this, And Ranieri had to come to me. He was the PD, of course, at the time, and had to come to me and said, look, you need to start stopping more guys. It seems like all these winners are all female, so, hey, one of the perks.
So you were actually driving Car 60 and just giving away stuff.
Yeah, I call in on the two-way radio and tell them I'm following a car, and they put me on the air, and I'm following a blue Ford Mustang with Florida tag number such and such, and they've got 60 seconds to pull over, and I'll give them a whatever we had.
And nothing like this had really been done.
Not really. I think they had done the Car 60 thing earlier at PDQ, but again, see, the Ape, I don't think the Ape marketed themselves. It was the Big Ape and the Ape Call, and the Brennans weren't into a lot of that promotion stuff. They had the Big Ape convention every year where they brought in the big names of the time, Brenda Lee and all the 50s rock stars. But other than that, it was maybe the difference was, since the Brennans owned Alabama radio station in Birmingham, and Big Bam was what it wasn't as slick either. The slickness of PDQ, I think, really did it. The DJs were just that much better.
So you mentioned about how the personalities were different, how the signals were different. Was the music different? I know with so many people who have, worked in Jacksonville over the years, it almost seems like there was a legendary rivalry between WPDQ and WAP.
There always was, but if you looked at the ratings, it certainly was. I mean, we were cutting down records and putting them on cart to make them shorter because we had so many commercials. I mean, that's how robust the market was for us. And I think the Ape did probably too. And it was just two different styles of radio. After the Kaplans bought the Ape, it became a slick station too. But it was what I would call a typical Jacksonville radio station. PDQ was not that when it first came back on the air after the hurricane. It was totally different.
How many minutes of commercials were you all running an hour, like max?
Well, probably, I don't know what the rule was, but it was about 18 minutes. you know, which is not bad, but you got to remember, we didn't have stop sets and all of that back in the day. You played your one record and then you played a couple commercials, and there were no music sweeps and no 50 minutes of uninterrupted music. You know, I'm sorry, it's not. To me, that's a phony line, and never liked that much in radio. But we didn't do that, and you know, the jocks participated. It was always something going on, and it was just fun.
The competition between WPDQ and WAPE, did it ever get into like any dirty tricks or pranks at that time?
Yeah. When the Star people were in charge of the radio station, they did the APE was doing the tenor-topper things, and they had these little orange styrofoam balls that they put on the tops of antennas. Well, we got wind of it before they kicked it off, and we came out with the green satellites, which was the same thing. And the sales staff went to Regency Square and took all the orange ones off and put ours on.
Wow.
Yeah, so yeah, that stuff went on.
Now, you mentioned again, you know, it's like you started off over at this Jacksonville Beach station, went away to NC State, you know, come back to the market. For those of us, you know, who may be, you know, hey, you know, getting to know more about Jacksonville broadcasting, what were your early impressions of Jacksonville around that time?
Oh, Jacksonville was totally different, obviously, than it is today. I lived at the beach, grew up at the beach. I mean, I can remember as a kid, we only had one car, so we had my mom and I would take the bus into Jacksonville to go to Coen Brothers. That was our big trip, you know, and probably hang out at Hemming Park. And back in the day, it was an easier time, just like you would imagine back in the 50s and into the 60s, pretty much the same thing. The roads were totally different. Traffic was just as bad, drivers just as bad, but totally different. And radio grew up a lot as time went on, and so you got what you got today.
So the town was pretty much the same from when you first started in radio at age 15 here compared to when you came back just a few years later from Raleigh, right?
Oh, well, when I came back, it had changed a little bit, but it changed more probably late 70s and after I got out of radio. When I came back after playing newspaper guy, it was totally different. And you know, well, I mean, I can remember when they built J. Turner Butler, and it had tolls on it, and everybody said, "What a waste of money! Nobody's ever going to use this stupid road." Nobody. I mean, there was nobody on it. You could go 100 miles an hour, and no police, no nothing. You just could fly down the road.
Which shifts did you work over at PDQ?
Pretty much everything. I started out doing weekends, which meant Sunday mornings, midnight to 6, you know, that kind of stuff. And when I went away to Fairfield, Iowa, I went to school out there and came back to finish up at JU. And that's when I really, I worked noon to 3 on PDQ. I worked 9 to midnight. All the shifts you could ever imagine. Never did morning drive, although Chuck Dent went on vacation and I wound up doing the morning news with Ranieri. Probably wasn't because of my voice. It wasn't because of my looks. It was probably because I always showed up on time.
What was that like working alongside Ranieri?
He was one of a kind. Never met another guy like him in radio. He was, like I said, you got what he did on the radio was pretty much his personality. He's a good guy, but he was very sarcastic, and he didn't put up with, you know, fooling around and doing stupid stuff on the air. And he was a good program director. And I think between him and Tom Kennington, Tom did the afternoon shift. I think between the two of them, they did as good a job with the music as I've ever seen. We did a lot of regional stuff, which you don't hear now. The Nightcrawlers, the Illusions, bands that were Jacksonville based, and we played their records, and we did well in playing them, not because somebody was giving you payola to play them, but because we promoted the local part of Jacksonville. And at the time, and you look at and see the number of bands that have come from this area, Skinner and all of those guys later on. But during the 60s, there were a lot. And the Friday Musicale, the Jacksonville Women's Club is where they had the dances, and it was loaded. It was just loaded with good talent. Mouse and the Boys, and it goes on and on.
You mentioned about payola a moment ago. What was the situation by the 60s? Because obviously so many people have heard about the congressional hearings, Alan Freed and all that, but was it a factor at all during the 1960s?
In Jacksonville, less. I think there was probably some of it going on. I think it would have been tough for a lot of guys, because we were picking your own music. So you get a record guy come in and say, I'll give you an extra $20 if you play this song. I would say overall there was very little. Bigger markets. It's Jacksonville, Florida. Come on. They wanted New York, Chicago, L.A., where it could really make a difference with record sales. Here, not so much.
It seems that back then, you mentioned about, so many of the personalities at WPDQ, which I'll get into a little bit more with you in a few moments, but it seems that one of the key differences in radio back then was that people did listen to people on the air, that there were more personalities, that you had some of your fans, Ranieri had some of his in the morning, all that.
True, absolutely. It's something you don't have as much of on radio now, the morning bunch that they have on all the stations. I can't say anything bad about it. I mean, they're doing their job. It was just a different atmosphere. And I think part of it was the kids were different. They enjoyed that. And we did remotes. And, people actually came out not to eat hot dogs and drink Cokes, but to see the disc jockey and see him playing phonograph records out there and talk to them and get their autographs. And you don't find that. Well, now you don't have those kind of remotes anymore anyway, so it doesn't matter. It was a different time.
Back then, were consultants involved at all?
Yeah, a little bit. Not like it is now. You had radio stations that were owned by one person. Henderson-Belk, like I said, owned PDQ and WKIX, and the Kaplans owned Big Waves in Charlotte. And those they were owners, and they believed in their product. And did we get paid a lot of money? No, I mean that wasn't it. But we were the radio disc jockeys. We always described ourselves as the truck drivers of the entertainment business. We didn't get a lot of flashy headlines and things like that, unless you were in a bigger market. But yeah, I think it's fair to say during that time we had, and it's funny because it doesn't seem like that long ago. It was a long time ago. The 60s was, the 60s was a different period anyway, and radio was part of that. It was different. We played, I think, a lot of good music. We didn't have a panel of experts to pick the songs that we played. The PD and the music director pretty much did it, and a lot more regional and a lot more marketing and fun type stuff.
When did the females start to get on air?
I hired my first female disc jockey when I was at WJXFM, and she fit right in. There was never a question. I never had any apply. It just didn't happen. And I mean, we were an AOR station at the time, and you didn't have as much. I always wanted to hire a female and have her air name be Marijuana, but it never happened. But I figured we should have a jingle. The Marijuana Show. Could have made history.
Indeed. So I want to ask you about some of the personalities at WPDQ. Of course, you mentioned Ranieri, you mentioned Dent. I'll mention like some individual folks. Any memories you have of any of them? Bill Greenwood.
Well, Bill was my inspiration, if there was. He was at Fletcher, out at the beach, and he was doing DCT stuff and working at the radio station.
DCT?
Yeah, Diversified Cooperative Training. Basically, you only went to school in the morning, and then you went to a job in the afternoon. And primarily for kids that maybe didn't want to go to college, couldn't afford college, whatever. And Bill was a disc jockey at WZRO, and that's what he did, and all of us knew him.
Where was WZR? Remember on the dial where they were?
1010.
Oh, okay, there you go, exactly,
Yeah,
that's the same
1010.
station, okay,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
that you started.
Yeah,
All right,
that's
there we
it.
go. And what about Bill Weaver?
Bill Weaver was the production guy at PDQ. He worked, I think he worked noon, no, he worked 9 to noon. And Bill was unbelievable. He'd been there at PDQ for a while after the new owner took over. And just a super guy. Went to work after PDQ. He went to work for Bill Cook Agency, and stayed there, I guess, till he retired. I haven't talked to him in years.
How about Ron Wayne?
Ron was a night guy. Ron and Records, and Ron was another one of those personalities. Ron did a lot of dances, and I think he probably made as much money off the dances as he did playing phonograph records on the radio. But a good guy.
George Marsh.
George Mesh.
Mesh.
George, another one of those guys that had been there at PDQ before the new owners took over, and he worked noon to 3, and just a super guy. Taught at Jones College for a while, and then when the new owners came in, they did a non-compete agreement, and he said, "I'm not signing that," and left. And I'm not sure where he went from here, but he was around.
A name that's been in radio quite a bit over the years, especially in the 60s and 70s, as I recall, Bruce Kramer.
Bruce Kramer. Bruce was working part-time at PDQ when I went to work there. And Bruce finally made it all the way up to morning guy at PDQ. And super nice guy. And like I said, I think there was probably a little animosity between the two of us because I took away some of his hours when I first came in, but we wound up being good friends. I did, when I was news director at PDQ, I was doing the morning show with Bruce, and we had kind of that same rapport that Mike and Chuck had. It was fun. Jerry Goodman was one of my favorite guys that I worked with. Jerry was about as funny a guy as I'd ever met. He was a magician, very funny on the radio. He did all kinds of things, and he wound up being a very good friend of mine. And I lost track of him. He left PDQ the first time and went to Pittsburgh and worked for a station there, I guess for about 6 months, something like that. But they didn't sell grits in Pittsburgh, so he had to come back to Jacksonville. And he came back and he worked from 6 to 9, and I worked 9 to midnight. And like I said, one of those kind of guys that you just never forget. And we kind of lost touch, and finally tracked him down on Facebook and got him involved with the Broadcasters Association too here, because he had lost track of all of us too.
There's a bit of lost art of radio news when it comes to the music side, of course. Maybe you can explain for us, when you became news director, how were you doing it? What was the length of how much time you had? Did you actually have anybody working for you at that time? How did this go?
Well, yeah, to begin with, and I started in news at WJAX and then went to PDQ as news director, and it was very basic. We had, usually one of us would cover city council meetings and stuff like that, to try to get, a little local angle and to get some, some interviews with people and some sound bites and stuff like that. But we primarily relied on either AP or UPI, rip and read. We had UPI audio, which had all the audio stuff, and so you throw a few of those sound bites in and use that. Typically a 5-minute newscast. Did we rewrite a lot of stuff? Some. There's some little local stuff, but as far it was rip and read. You didn't spend a lot of time doing that.
You had some personalities you worked with. What was one of the funniest on-air things that you recall?
There are so many. I don't really know. I think by the time I got a full-time job and doing the thing, doing what I was doing, a lot of funny things, believe it or not, happened at KTZ when I was, a beautiful music station, and getting phone calls from the owners about don't play that record because it's too loud, and those kind of things. But we had so many things, and we played jokes on people, and but that was part of it, and we had a really good time when I was at Jax FM too, doing the AOR format. I had a crew there that were just absolutely amazing, crazy guys.
Now I'll jump back to WPDQ in a moment, but since you mentioned about those days over at KTZ, and it was the Jones,
Yeah.
as I recall, Jack Jones?
Yeah.
Which act, do you remember, who they might have objected to back then? I know it's been a while, but who
I
did they say
couldn't
was
tell.
too-
If it was too loud, they just didn't like it, and
They just wanted instrumentals, you're saying?
well, not just instrumentals, but even some of the instrumentals they would call and say, "Don't ever play that again." Put an X through it and don't play it.
From what you recall, would the Carpenters have made it through with
Oh
their...
yeah, Carpenters.
Brad was fine, yeah.
Carpenters, would just be perfect.
You were over at WJAX FM. That was album-oriented rock, you said?
Yes. They were.
Tell me about those days.
Those were, I had, our main competitors were the Wave, AID, and Bill Bartlett was one of my favorite guys. He was at Jones College, taught him, and he did a great job in bringing AOR to Jacksonville, so it was easy for us, and they changed formats, and we wound up with as the only AOR station. But Steve Fox, Rich Langlois, those guys were all part of our group, and a lot of fun.
It was kind of different working for a city-owned radio station.
Yeah, we were one of the last ones. I think the one in Dallas was the other one that was still municipally owned, and you were at the mercy of the city council. One of the stations was carrying Georgia football, and they didn't want it anymore, and they had to, and so they went to one of the councilmen and said, "We think you ought to put that on the city-owned station." So before you knew it, we had Georgia football on, right in the middle of our AOR stuff. It was crazy, but teaching was probably one of the most fun things that I did and most rewarding. The students that I had were great. Some have gone on to much bigger and better things.
If you were to pick a couple who stand out.
Well, Mary Jo, and would obviously be one of them, and her husband, Pete. Joe Piscopo, taught Joe Piscopo, and Ben Frazier, Reggie Henry. All of those guys wound up going on to bigger and better. One of them was a newscaster for the Mutual Broadcasting System for a while. And that's the teaching part of it was great. But as I worked, the longer I worked in radio, especially as a program director, I hired a young kid still in high school over in Lake City. And he's now one of the big DJs at a country station in Ocala, and done extremely well. So it makes you look back and understand it is a pretty wonderful life, and I'm just glad that I was able to participate in so many other people's lives.
Obviously, a lot of pride you have in all the accomplishments of your students. What was Piscopo like back then?
He was just as funny then. He used to do an imitation of King Kong that was just absolutely right on. The way in the original King Kong, the way the animation worked, or whatever they had to make the gorilla move, and he was just hilarious.
Why did you leave the radio business, and what are you doing these days?
I just did not want to get involved with the corporate structure anymore. I didn't like it. I felt like it was really bad to have your music programmed out of Dallas, Texas, and I missed those days. I missed the fun part of radio, and that's just, that's the way it is. I got into the newspaper business on the sales side, the dark side, and had a great career there. And so now I'm semi-retired. I work at Pinehurst Resort, driving golf carts, because I get to play golf there for cheap. And I also work for a little magazine in Southern Pines, North Carolina.
Last question, if there's anything that you think that people who are young people, who maybe are curious about the industry, curious about getting in, should know, what do you think they should know?
Just be yourself and have fun. I mean, that's what I was told. You know, have a good time, and it's changed so much now. It's hard to put your finger on exactly what you would tell somebody, but if that's your passion, go for it.
Butch, thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
The happiest distance between 2 points. Station 16 WPD2.
It's the DC-5 on the Peiker program, proceeding until midnight. We'll take your requests. About 10 o'clock, every other song from the Hall of Fame on our Best to You. That'll be starting at 10 o'clock.